Hey guys, tonight we're going to talk about something so common, so humble, that you probably have it sitting on your kitchen table right now. It is a simple crystalline rock that we sprinkle on our food without a second thought. But for almost all of human history, this simple substance was a form of treasure, a strategic resource as valuable as gold, a force that built cities, paid armies, and drove men to cross continents and oceans. Tonight, we're going to tell the story of salt. Frankly, it's a little strange to think of that shaker next to your pepper grinder as the source of empires and the stuff of legends, but it truly was. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's always a huge encouragement. For those of you already settled in, I'd love to see where and when you're listening from. Go ahead and drop your city and local time in the comments. I'm recording this on a warm, humid afternoon here in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The gentle whir of the fan fades, and in its place, you hear the sound of a soft wind moving through the leaves of a vast, ancient forest. The air is damp and smells of deep, rich earth and decaying leaves. There are no cities here, no roads, no empires. The world is a deep, quiet canvas of green and brown. We are going back to a time long before history was written, because the story of salt begins before the story of humanity. You are a traveler in this ancient world, a silent observer. You find yourself standing at the edge of a small clearing. But this is no ordinary clearing. The ground here is bare, trampled, and stained a pale, chalky white. And gathered in this space is a silent congregation of animals. A herd of immense, shaggy mammoths, several deer with magnificent antlers, and a family of wild boar are all gathered here. They are not fighting. They are not eating. They are all, with a quiet, focused intensity, licking the ground. This is a natural salt lick, and you are witnessing one of the most powerful and fundamental forces in the natural world, the primal thirst for salt. For all animal life, salt, specifically sodium chloride, is not a luxury. It is essential. It is vital for nerve function, for muscle contraction, for maintaining the very balance of fluids in the body. For predators who get salt from the blood and flesh of their prey, it is less of a concern. But for the great herbivores of the world, whose diet consists of plants, salt is a scarce and precious mineral. They will travel for miles, crossing mountains and rivers, risking exposure to predators, all for a taste of this life-giving earth. This clearing is the world's first and most popular health food store. The mammoths are here for the electrolytes. The deer are getting their essential minerals. There is no trendy packaging, but the product is a guaranteed 5-star hit. You are not an animal, but an early human watching from the safety of the trees. You are a hunter, and you live and breathe the rhythms of the natural world. You have seen this behavior before. You know that this place is special, that it draws all life to it. Anthropologists today debate just how central the search for salt was to the migration patterns of early nomadic humans. Did our ancestors simply follow the great herds to their hunting grounds? Or did they follow them to the salt licks that the herds themselves depended on? It is likely the two were inseparable. The salt lick was a landmark, a strategic resource that dictated the movement of both predator and prey. Puts a new spin on things. Maybe the great mammoth migrations weren't about finding greener pastures. Maybe they just really wanted a salty snack. After the great beasts have had their fill and have lumbered back into the forest, you step cautiously into the clearing. You kneel down and touch the white-stained earth. It is cool and slightly damp. You bring a pinch of it to your lips. The taste is sharp, pungent, and intensely, profoundly good. Your body, which subsists on a diet of nuts, berries, and unsalted meat, recognizes it instantly. This is something you need. Your diet mostly consists of things that are fine. But this salty earth? It's the most exciting flavor profile you've experienced all year. It's a culinary revelation. You gather a handful of the precious earth, wrapping it carefully in a large leaf to take back to your camp. This salty dust is not just a rock. It is a nutrient. It is a flavor. It is life. And as you walk back through the quiet ancient woods, you look down at the piece of meat from your morning's hunt, wrapped at your side. And a new revolutionary idea, an idea that will change the course of human history forever, begins to form in your mind. What would happen if you took this magical, life-giving dust and put it on food that was no longer living? You return to your small camp, a temporary shelter of branches and animal hides nestled at the base of a great, sun-warmed rock outcropping. The precious salt-laced earth is still clutched in your hand, wrapped carefully in a large, waxy leaf. You are a hunter. Your life is governed by a simple, brutal rhythm, the cycle of feast and famine. When a hunt is successful like it was this morning, there is a bounty of fresh meat, more than your small family can possibly eat before it begins to spoil. You eat your fill for a day, perhaps two. But then, inevitably, the meat begins to turn, the scent attracting flies and predators. The rest of the kill is lost, a feast for scavengers. But today, that revolutionary idea that began at the salt lick, the idea of applying this life-giving mineral to meat that is no longer living, will not leave you alone. You decide to try an experiment. You take a choice piece of meat from the wild boar you hunted at dawn, a small haunch rich and dark. You lay it on a flat, clean stone, and then, with a feeling of committing some strange sacred act, you rub the salty earth all over it. You are not entirely sure why you are doing this. Perhaps you hope it will simply make the meat taste better tomorrow. Perhaps you hope the strange power of the salt lick, the power that draws all animals to it, will somehow protect the meat from the spirits of decay. You wrap the salted haunch carefully in more leaves and place it in a cool, dry hollow in the rock, away from the sun. A day passes. Then another. Normally, by now, the leftover meat would be an unspeakable, pungent mess. With a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, you retrieve your experiment. You unwrap the leaves. The meat is still there. It looks different, certainly. It is darker, firmer, and has shrunk slightly. You lean in and sniff it. There is no foul odor of rot. There is only the clean, sharp smell of the salt and the faint, savory scent of dried meat. This is the moment of truth. With a sharp flint knife, you slice off a thin sliver. It is tough and chewy. You place it in your mouth. The flavor explodes on your tongue. Intensely salty, intensely savory. It is delicious. More importantly, hours later, you do not get sick. You have done it. You have conquered time. You have defeated decay. This is the single greatest scientific breakthrough of your generation. You have just invented jerky. You have no idea what to call it, but delicious dry meat that doesn't try to kill you seems like an excellent working title. The science behind your discovery is a beautiful, invisible dance called osmosis. The salt on the surface of the meat draws the water out of the cells of the flesh. Just as importantly, it draws the water out of the cells of any bacteria or microorganisms that would cause spoilage, either killing them or rendering them completely inert. By removing the water, you remove the possibility of decay. This simple act, the application of salt to food, was arguably the birth of food technology, a revolution that would change everything about the human story. The implications of your discovery are staggering. A single large kill can now feed your family for weeks, not just days. You can now create a surplus, a store of food to survive the lean, cold months of winter. You can carry preserved food with you, allowing you to travel further, to explore new territories, to migrate. Your family is skeptical at first. You are, after all, offering them meat that is several days old. They look at you as if you are trying to poison them, but after the first cautious bite, they are converts. You are hailed as a genius, the one who made meat extra chewy and interesting. Archaeologists debate exactly when and where this discovery was first made. While direct evidence of salting from the earliest prehistoric sites is difficult to find, it is clear that the ability to preserve food was a fundamental prerequisite for the development of more complex, settled human societies. Before salt, smoking and air drying were the main methods of preservation. But smoking required a constant fire, and air drying only worked in very specific climates. Salting was more reliable, more portable, and more effective. And so, your life as a hunter is transformed. The quest for game is still important, but now a second, equally vital quest has begun. The quest for more salt. The handful you gathered is nearly gone. The salt lick is far away and unreliable. Your family's survival, which once depended only on your skill with a spear, now also depends on your access to this magical white dust. It is now the most important substance in your world. There must be a better way to get it than waiting for a mammoth to show you where it is. One afternoon, you look towards a great, shimmering body of water in the distance, a vast inland sea, and you notice the white crust that forms on the rocks at its edge as the water evaporates in the sun. A new thought dawns. What if you don't have to find the salt? What if you could make it? The salt lick was a gift from the earth, a place of discovery. But it is unreliable and it is not yours to control. Your new idea, however, the notion of creating your own salt from the great waters, is the very beginning of industry. It is the dawn of taking control of a fundamental resource. Your small community moves, over the course of a generation, closer to the source of this new potential wealth, a vast, salty marsh on the coast of a great sea. Here, the air tastes different. It is heavy with moisture and carries the sharp, clean tang of salt. At first, your methods are simple. You find natural, shallow hollows in the coastal rocks. At high tide, they fill with seawater. You watch as the relentless sun beats down on these pools day after day, and slowly the water vanishes, leaving behind a thin, flaky, glittering crust of salt crystals. You scrape it up. It is pure and potent. This is solar evaporation, the simplest form of salt making. But it is slow. It depends on the sun and the tides. It produces only a little at a time. To truly build a future, you need more. You need technology, and so the next great leap is made. It is centered around two things, clay and fire. You and your community begin to create simple, crude earthenware pots. They are not elegant. They are thick, porous, and built for a single purpose. They are tools, not treasures. You build large, long fire pits and you fill these pots with the salty brine from the marsh. Then you place them over the roaring fire. The water begins to steam, then to boil violently. It evaporates 100 times faster than the sun could manage. You work in shifts, feeding the fire, refilling the pots with more brine until finally, all the water is gone. What is left inside each pot is a solid, white, cone-shaped cake of salt. The only way to retrieve it is to break the pot that made it. With a sharp rap from a stone, the crude pottery shatters, falling away to reveal the prize within. This process, and the mountains of broken pottery shards it leaves behind, is one of the earliest forms of mass production in the archaeological record. These fragments, known collectively by the French term briquettage, are the telltale sign that archaeologists look for to identify a prehistoric salt-making site. You are now running the world's first manufacturing plant. The assembly line consists of you, a roaring fire, and a lot of pots. The work is hot, smoky, and your main industry is breaking pottery on purpose, which feels slightly counterintuitive. The salt you produce is not the fine, free-flowing powder of the modern world. It is a hard, heavy, cone-shaped lump of grayish, impure salt crystals fused together by the heat. But it is wealth. It is a standardized, solid unit of a precious resource. It can be stored, it can be stacked, and most importantly, it can be transported. Generations from now, archaeologists will find the mountain of broken pottery shards you are creating and be very confused. They will wonder if your civilization was just incredibly clumsy, or perhaps held some kind of strange, pot-smashing religious festival. Scholars today debate the social structure of these early salt-producing communities. Did this new technology lead to the rise of the first specialists, a salt master who controlled the resource and gained power and influence? Or was it a communal activity, the fruits of the labor shared equally among the group? The control of salt, it is argued, may have been one of the very first levers of social power, the beginning of the divide between the haves and the have-nots. But for you, the most important change is this. You now have a surplus. You have more salt than your own family needs for preserving your food. And a surplus is the seed of trade. You can now take your salt cones and travel inland to the communities of the deep forest who have no salt of their own, who still rely on the chance discovery of a salt lick. You arrive at their settlement. They offer to trade you fine flint for your spearheads or supple deer hides for clothing. You offer them a rock that makes their food taste better and stops it from rotting. You feel you have the better end of the deal. The simple footpaths between your coastal saltworks and the inland villages become the first trade routes, the first arteries of commerce, all centered on this one vital commodity. And as human society grows more complex, as villages become towns, and towns become cities, and cities become great empires, these humble, salt-stained footpaths will widen. They will be straightened, paved with stone, and guarded by soldiers. They will become the highways of power and wealth, great roads known to all, like the most famous and ancient road in all of Rome, the Via Salaria, the Salt Road. The world of mud and grass and crude clay pots dissolves. The centuries rush by in a great, silent blur. You are still standing beside a road, but it is no longer a simple footpath trod into the earth. This road is wide, engineered, and paved with great, gray paving stones, fitted together with the precision that speaks of immense power and purpose. This is the Via Salaria, the Salt Road, and it hums with the ceaseless energy of the Roman Empire. You stand by the side of the road, just outside the bustling gates of Rome itself. The air is dusty and filled with the sounds of iron-shod wheels on stone, the lowing of oxen, and the shouts of men in a language you now understand as an early, guttural Latin. This road is one of the oldest and most vital arteries leading to the heart of the Republic, and later, the Empire. Its origins are even older than Rome itself, first beaten out of the earth by the ancient Sabine people to transport their most precious commodity. You watch the traffic. Farmers lead donkeys laden with baskets of vegetables. A wealthy senator, his face a mask of bored disdain for the common chaos, is carried past in an ornate litter by 4 sweating slaves. But mostly you watch the wagons. Heavy, slow-moving wooden carts, drawn by teams of straining oxen, piled high with coarse, heavy sacks. From a tear in one of the sacks, a trickle of familiar white crystals spills onto the paving stones. This is a salt convoy, bringing the lifeblood of the city from the great coastal salt pans, the Salini at the mouth of the Tiber River. There in vast, man-made lagoons, the Romans practiced the same solar evaporation you once did in your rocky hollows, but on an industrial, imperial scale. And the salt they harvested was a strategic resource as vital to the survival of Rome as fresh water from the aqueducts or grain from Egypt. In a city of 1 million people, salt was not a luxury, it was a necessity. It was used to preserve the vast quantities of fish, olives, and meat needed to feed the populace. It was essential in a dozen industrial processes like tanning leather. Control of the salt supply was one of the foundations of the state's power. You watch a huge wagon creak by, guarded by 2 rather bored-looking soldiers. It seems a bit much for what is essentially a shipment of seasoning, but you're beginning to understand that in this world, that wagon might as well be filled with gold bullion. The political importance of salt was so immense that it even worked its way into the names of the Roman elite. A high-ranking magistrate, a censor, who successfully imposed a state-controlled price or a new tax on salt could be awarded the honorary surname Salinator. It was a name of honor, a mark of pride for a patrician family, a testament to the fact that their great ancestor had successfully managed the city's supply of a condiment. The senator in his litter, who looked so unimpressed by the dusty road, would probably be delighted if he could add Salinator to the end of his name. Historians often debate the precise economics of the Roman salt supply. To what extent did the state subsidize salt to keep the populace happy, versus using it as a powerful source of tax revenue? This question gets to the heart of whether the government saw this vital resource as a public service or a taxable commodity. The answer most likely is both. As you watch the endless stream of commerce, you see a small detachment of legionaries marching towards the city. They are returning from a tour of duty, their armor dusty but their stride confident. They are laughing and joking amongst themselves, and you overhear one of them mention that it is payday. Your focus shifts from the great wagons of salt to these individual men. In a few hours, they will line up before their paymaster to receive their stipendium. And that pay will consist of more than just a handful of silver coins. It will include a portion of this very substance trundling its way up the road from the sea. A ration of salt. Their salarium. You follow the detachment of legionaries in your mind's eye. They leave the dusty, commercial bustle of the Via Salaria behind and march with disciplined purpose into the city proper. They arrive at their barracks, a place not unlike the statio of the vigilas you have visited before, functional, organized, and smelling faintly of leather and sweat. It is payday. In the courtyard, a paymaster, an officer known as an optio, has set up a simple wooden table. The soldiers of the cohort, having cleaned their armor and gear after their long march, line up in an orderly fashion. You watch as one man steps forward. The optio calls out his name, making a check mark on a wax tablet. He counts out a small pile of silver coins, denarii, the soldier's basic wage. But the transaction is not complete. Another clerk pushes forward a small, rough-spun cloth bag, tied at the neck with a leather thang. The bag is heavy and contains a coarse, grayish-white substance. This is the soldier's salarium. This is his salt. Our modern word, salary, is a direct ghost of this moment. It comes from the Latin salarium, which was inextricably linked to this vital ration provided to the soldiers of Rome. For the Roman army, an institution constantly on the move, salt was as crucial as iron for their swords or leather for their sandals. It was the key to their logistics. An army on the march in Gaul or Judea couldn't rely on fresh food. They carried their provisions with them, and those provisions were preserved with salt. Salted pork, salted fish, and brined olives were the fuel that kept the legions moving. Furthermore, a soldier on a long march under a hot sun would lose salt through his sweat. Replenishing it was vital for maintaining his health and stamina. Salt was also a powerful antiseptic, one of the most effective they had. A wound washed with the salt solution was far less likely to become infected, a life-saving piece of battlefield medicine. He weighs the small bag in his hand. It's not as exciting as the shiny silver coins, but in some ways it's far more important. You can't stop a wound from festering with a denarius, and you certainly can't use a coin to make your nightly bowl of bland porridge taste less like wallpaper paste. This ancient practice echoes in our language in another way. The common phrase, to be worth one's salt, comes directly from this Roman reality. A soldier who performed his duties well, who was brave and reliable, was considered worth his salt. He was worthy of this precious payment. A poor soldier was not worth his salt. The value of a man could be measured against the value of this mineral. You watch a new recruit in the line accidentally drop his bag, spilling some of the precious crystals on the ground. The optio gives him a look of pure, withering contempt. Wasting the emperor's silver would be a mistake. Wasting the emperor's salt is a sign of deep character flaw. Historians and classicists still debate the exact nature of the salarium. Was it always a direct physical ration of salt, as you are witnessing now? Or was it sometimes a specific cash allowance, salarium argentum, or salt money given to the soldiers for the express purpose of buying their own salt from a state-approved vendor? The evidence is ambiguous, and the practice likely varied across the vast expanse and long history of the empire. It may represent a fascinating transition point between an older barter economy, where goods were payment, and a more modern cash economy. What is certain is that the Roman state's ability to control the salt trade was fundamental to its military power. The salt wagons you saw on the Via Salaria were as vital to the Roman war machine as the wagons carrying shields, spears, and arrows. An army without salt was an army that could not march, could not eat, and could not effectively heal its wounded. It's a powerful thought. The entire magnificent edifice of the Roman Empire, with its aqueducts and its stone roads, its iron legions, and its marble temples, was all held together, in part, by a steady and reliable supply of this boring white rock. It was the secret ingredient in the recipe for world domination. The Romans, with their brilliant grasp of logistics and administration, had perfected the use of salt as a tool to maintain their power. But far to the east, another great and ancient empire had taken this concept even further. They had transformed salt from merely a strategic commodity into the very bedrock of their imperial treasury, a source of wealth so vast it could fund armies and build wonders. They had declared salt to be the sole property of the emperor. The dusty courtyard of the Roman barracks dissolves. The sounds of rough Latin fade, replaced by the softer, more tonal cadence of a new language. The faces around you change. You have traveled thousands of miles to the east and jumped backwards in time. You are now in Han Dynasty China, in the grand capital city of Chang'an, during the reign of the great Emperor Wu in the 2nd century BC. You find yourself in a quiet, orderly government office. The air smells of ink, damp bamboo, and beeswax candles. Here, there are no soldiers or merchants, only scholar officials in elegant silk robes, their long fingernails cultivated as a sign that they perform no manual labor. They move with a quiet, deliberate purpose, their brushes flying across long scrolls of bamboo and silk. You are watching one such official. He is a man of immense power, a provincial governor, and he is reviewing the state accounts. But he is not counting taxes on grain or silk. He is counting the revenue from a far more fundamental commodity. In 119 BC, the Emperor Wu, facing enormous expenses from his constant wars against the Xiongnu nomads to the north and his vast infrastructure projects at home, made a momentous decision. He declared a state monopoly on the production and sale of two of the nation's most vital resources, iron and salt. This was a level of control far beyond what you saw in Rome. The Roman state taxed and regulated the salt trade. The Han state owned it. From this moment on, no private citizen could lawfully produce or sell salt. Every salt pan on the coast, every salt well drilled deep into the earth, was now the direct property of the emperor. The state set the price, an artificially high price, and the profits flowed directly into the imperial treasury. This official in his fine silk robe is, in essence, the vice president of imperial seasoning. It is a much more powerful and serious job than it sounds. This policy was a subject of intense debate at the time. In a famous series of discussions recorded in a book called The Discourses on Salt and Iron, scholars argued furiously over the monopoly's merits. The emperor's officials, the legalists, argued that state control was necessary to fund the army, stabilize prices, and prevent wealthy merchants from becoming powerful enough to challenge the throne. On the other side, the Confucian scholars argued that it was morally wrong for the state to compete with the people for profit. They claimed the monopoly caused immense hardship for the common peasant, forcing them to pay high prices for a basic necessity of life and creating a new class of corrupt government officials, and it created a new kind of criminal, the salt smuggler. By making a common necessity expensive, the state inadvertently spawned a thriving black market. You can imagine the scene in a back alley of Chang'an. A shady character with a furtive look in his eye. First, "Hey friend, you want to buy some salt? This is the good stuff. Pure. Untaxed." Controlling salt had created the world's first black market for a condiment. Historians today continue to debate the long-term effects of this policy, one of the first great experiments in nationalization. Did the immense and steady revenue from the salt monopoly truly strengthen the Han state, allowing it to fund the armies that protected the Silk Road and the labor that expanded the Great Wall? Or did it, as the Confucians argued, stifle private enterprise and place such a heavy burden on the peasantry that it fueled the social unrest that would eventually contribute to the dynasty's decline? It is a classic debate between the virtues of state control and free markets, played out with a salt shaker over 2,000 years ago. The Roman soldier was worth his salt, a phrase implying his value was recognized with a vital commodity. The Chinese peasant, however, was simply paying for his salt, a transaction that underscored the power of the state over his daily life. It is a subtle but profound difference in perspective. You watch the official make a final, elegant brushstroke on his scroll, noting the immense profit delivered to the emperor from the coastal salt works of Shandong province. His work is done. He has managed the flow of this white gold, transforming it into the power that moves armies and builds palaces. But his world is one of silk scrolls and ink stones. He has never felt the sting of brine on his hands or the heat of a salt-boiling fire. He has only seen the result, not the source. And not all salt comes from the sea. Some of the purest, most valuable salt in the world is not harvested from water. but mined like a precious stone from deep within the earth itself. To see that, our journey must take us from the polished halls of imperial power to one of the most desolate and forbidding landscapes on the planet, the Great Sahara Desert. The world shifts again. The scent of ink and damp silk is replaced by the clean, dry, superheated air of the deep desert. The sky above is a vast, empty, and piercingly blue dome. You are in the heart of the Sahara, a place of stunning and absolute emptiness, a landscape of rock and sand that seems to stretch on into infinity. But even here, in one of the most inhospitable places on the planet, there is immense wealth. Not the gold of the south, but the white gold of the north. You have arrived at the legendary salt mines of Tagaza. Tagaza is not truly a town. It is a grim functional settlement that exists for one purpose and one purpose only: salt. The most remarkable thing you notice as you approach is that the buildings themselves, the low, square huts of the miners, seem to glitter in the relentless sun. That is because they are built from the only building material available in this treeless wasteland: great, rough-hewn blocks of rock salt. The walls are salt, the floors are packed salt, even the local mosque, as the great traveler Ibn Battuta would later report, is built from slabs of salt, with a roof made of camel hide. It is a settlement seasoned from the ground up. Your journey continues downward into the earth. You are lowered on a rope into the mouth of a deep, dark shaft. The oppressive, shimmering heat of the surface vanishes, replaced by a still, surprising coolness. At the bottom, you step into a vast, man-made cavern, illuminated by the flickering, smoky light of a few small oil lamps. The air tastes sharp and clean, and everything glitters. The walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath your feet. It is all solid, crystalline rock salt. The lamplight catches on the facets of the crystals, throwing back a million tiny, dancing points of light. It is a subterranean mineral galaxy. Here in the cool darkness, the miners work. They are slaves and bonded laborers, their bodies lean and powerful from a life of constant, grueling toil. You watch them work. There is no blasting powder here, no advanced machinery. There is only human muscle and simple tools. With rhythmic, patient blows, the miners use iron picks to painstakingly chip away at the cavern floor, cutting deep, straight grooves. Then, using wedges, they pry huge, rectangular slabs of pure rock salt from the quarry floor. The only sound is the steady, percussive chip, chip, chip of the picks against the salt, a sound that has echoed in this cavern for centuries. It's the ultimate seasoning at the source experience. The air you breathe is salty, the walls are salty, the floor you stand on is salty. You imagine that even the brackish water they drink from the settlement's well must taste of the mineral that defines their entire existence. It is a world of a single, overpowering flavor. The slabs the miners cut are of a remarkably uniform size and weight. Each slab, called a bar, is about 3 feet long and 2 feet wide, weighing over 100 pounds. This is not by accident. They are cut to be the perfect size and weight for their next destination, the back of a camel. Here, deep beneath the Sahara, the product is already being packaged for the consumer. This slab is not just a block of salt, it is a unit of currency. The miners are masters of their craft. They cut a perfect, massive rectangular block and, with great effort, lever it from the floor. It's probably the biggest single salt crystal you will ever see in your life. You wouldn't even know where to begin looking for a salt shaker big enough to fit it. Historians and archaeologists still debate the social dynamics of this strange settlement. Was Tagaza a permanent, year-round town? Or was it occupied only seasonally by the miners and the caravan drivers who were their only link to the outside world? Given the extreme climate and the complete lack of any local food source, every mouthful had to be brought in by camel. It is likely that the population here swelled and shrank dramatically with the coming and going of the great trade caravans. The work was dangerous, the life was brutal. The threat of a cave-in was constant. The houses may have been made of salt, but if you got angry and slammed a door, you risked damaging your own net worth. It was a very complicated living situation with a final great heave, A newly cut slab of salt is hauled up from the mine shaft, emerging from the cool darkness into the blinding light of the desert sun. It is ready. Its long subterranean slumber is over. You watch as it is carefully wrapped in hides and loaded onto the back of a patient, waiting camel. The miner's work is done. The caravan's work is about to begin. The salt block houses of Tagaza shrink, and then disappear into the shimmering heat haze behind you. You are now part of the caravan, a slow-moving river of men and animals flowing out into the vast, silent ocean of the Sahara. The world contracts. There is only the endless sand, the infinite sky, and the rhythmic, soft padding of hundreds of camel feet. The only other sounds are the gentle creak of leather harnesses and the occasional guttural cry of a driver. This is the domain of the Tuareg, the legendary blue men of the desert. You see them now, moving with a silent, graceful confidence through their natural element. They are tall men, wrapped in flowing robes and veils of deep indigo cloth. The dye over time rubs off onto their skin, giving it a distinctive bluish tint. Their eyes, the only part of their faces visible, are sharp and clear, constantly scanning the horizon, reading the subtle language of the dunes. They are the masters of this empty space, the expert navigators who hold the lives of the entire caravan in their hands. For centuries, these trans-Saharan trade routes were among the most arduous and dangerous on Earth. The journey you are on now, from the salt mines of the north to the great market city of Timbuktu in the south, can take more than 2 months. This caravan is the lifeline connecting the kingdoms of West Africa with the Mediterranean world, and salt is its primary reason for being. The daily rhythm of the caravan is dictated by the sun. You travel mostly in the cool of the night and the early morning, resting during the unbearable heat of the midday. The lead guide navigates not with a map, but by the stars, the same stars you once studied with Al-Hajj in a quiet Timbuktu courtyard. During the day, he navigates by the sun, by the prevailing direction of the wind as it shapes the dunes, and by a deep, almost supernatural memory of the landscape, recognizing subtle shifts in the color of the sand that are invisible to your untrained eye. He seems to be able to navigate by smelling the air or tasting the dust. You, on the other hand, got completely lost just trying to walk from your spot in the line to the back of the caravan. It's clear that a good sense of direction means something very different out here. The camel you are walking beside is carrying 2 massive 100-pound slabs of pure rock salt, one strapped to each side of its specialized saddle. The animal seems completely unbothered by this immense load. It just chews its cud with a look of serene philosophical detachment, as if contemplating the deep existential meaning of sand. The domestication of the dromedary camel was the key piece of technology that made this entire, continent-spanning trade possible. Its ability to carry crushing loads for days on end with minimal water is a miracle of biology. This entire economy, this flow of wealth that builds empires, rests squarely on the back of this grumpy, spitting, but unbelievably resilient animal. Life here is fragile. The greatest danger is not bandits or raiders, but the desert itself. A single miscalculation, a single dried-up well along the route, could mean a slow, thirsty death for hundreds of men and animals. The Tuareg guides know the location of every well, every oasis, every patch of scrubby grazing. Their knowledge is worth more than any treasure. Historians today debate the true scale of this ancient trade. Arab chroniclers from the period wrote of massive super caravans, comprising 10 or even 20,000 camels, a moving city of commerce. Are these accounts exaggerated? Archaeological evidence is sparse, swallowed by the ever-shifting sands. Scholars must piece the story together from these written histories, from the analysis of goods found at either end of the route, and from the rich oral traditions of the desert peoples themselves. As the weeks pass, you become hypnotized by the journey. The swaying of the camels, the vast silence, the slow, imperceptible change in the landscape. You are part of the world's slowest, most valuable delivery service. Your cargo is a simple condiment, but with every step you take southward, its value increases exponentially. The rock that was chipped from the ground into Gaza will, by the time it reaches its destination, be worth a king's ransom. Then one day something changes. The character of the sand shifts. You see the first hardy scrubby tree. You spot the tracks of a gazelle. The air, for the first time in weeks, seems to hold a hint of moisture. You are approaching the Sahel, the southern shore of the Great Desert Sea. In the far hazy distance, you see a smudge of brown against the horizon. It is the sign of a great settlement. Your long, arduous journey is nearing its end. The salt has almost reached its destination, where its value will be transformed, almost alchemically, into pure gold. The smudge on the horizon slowly resolves itself into the familiar, yet still astonishing, sight of the mud brick towers and earthen mosques of Timbuktu. A palpable sense of relief ripples through the men of the caravan. The journey is over. They have crossed the ocean of sand and arrived at the shore. As you approach the city gates, people come out to watch your arrival. The arrival of a great salt caravan is a major event, a sign of the city's health and its enduring connection to the wider world. The massive, rough-hewn slabs of rock salt are carefully unloaded from the camels' backs, the animals groaning with relief. These slabs, which were simply a part of the earth in a dark mine into Gaza, are now a form of treasure, the white gold of the desert. They are carried to a designated trading ground on the edge of the city, where the next stage of their incredible journey will begin. Here, the agents of the gold merchants from the south are waiting. These are men who have traveled up the Niger River from the great forest kingdoms, lands rich with unimaginable quantities of gold, but with almost no natural sources of salt. For them, salt is a biological necessity, for themselves and their livestock, and a vital technology for preserving food in their humid climate. This mutual desperate need, the North's need for gold, the South's need for salt, is the engine that powers the great empires of West Africa. The transaction that you are about to witness is the stuff of legend. You watch as the Tuareg merchants arrange their salt slabs in neat rows on the ground. Then they retreat, leaving the salt unguarded. After a time, the gold traders come forward. They inspect the quality of the salt slabs, and next to each one, they place a small leather bag filled with a certain amount of gold dust. Then they too retreat. This is the famous silent trade of West Africa, a form of barter that allows commerce between groups who may not trust each other or even share a common language. It is the most polite and least stressful business negotiation in history. There is no haggling, no shouting, just a quiet, respectful process of leaving piles of treasure for the other party to consider. The Tuareg merchants return. They look at the bags of gold next to their salt slabs. If the amount is fair, they take the gold and leave the salt, and the deal is done. If they feel the offer is too low, they will simply leave everything as it is and retreat once more, a silent signal to the gold traders that they must add more gold to their offer. Historians debate how widespread this specific ritual truly was. While it makes for a wonderful story, it is likely that in a sophisticated commercial hub like Timbuktu, most trade was conducted through direct negotiation, using professional brokers and standardized weights and measures. But the principle remains the same. The phrase "worth its weight in gold" is, here in this dusty trading ground, not a metaphor. It is a literal, everyday business transaction. You watch as a broker uses a small, delicate set of scales to weigh a single massive slab of salt against a bag of pure gold dust. They are of equal value. The traders are connoisseurs. Just as a gem merchant can judge a diamond, they can judge the quality of the salt. The pure white crystalline salt from the best mines is far more valuable than the grayer, more sedimentary salt from other locations. You watch a single slab of rock, the same kind you saw being painfully chipped from the mine floor, being exchanged for a quantity of gold that could probably buy a house in the city. Your childhood dream of becoming a respected goat herder suddenly seems deeply unambitious. The trade is completed. The Tuareg merchants, their camels now lightened, will use their new gold wealth to buy the goods of the south: grain, fine cotton cloth, cola nuts, and scholarly books, to carry back north. The slabs of salt will begin a new journey, traveling south by river and by porter, being broken into smaller and smaller pieces, their value increasing with every mile they move away from Timbuktu. The camels, now relieved of their great burden, look exactly the same as they did before, profoundly bored and unimpressed. You're not sure a camel would be impressed even if you paid it in gold dust. Their capacity for majestic indifference is truly something to behold. This incredible exchange, this transformation of salt into gold, was the foundation of Timbuktu's golden age. But the story of salt is a global one. At the very same time that these caravans were crossing the Sahara, on another continent, another great and wealthy power was building its own empire on a foundation of salt. This empire was not built on desert sand, but on water. Its roads were not dusty tracks, but canals. And its salt was not mined from the earth, but harvested from the sea. Our journey now takes us to the shimmering lagoon of Venice. The dry, dusty air of the Sahara dissolves, replaced by the cool, damp, salty breeze of a coastal marsh. The endless, monochromatic landscape of the desert gives way to the shimmering blues and greens of a great lagoon. The timeline moves forward, into the heart of the Middle Ages. You are in Europe now. You are in Venice. But this is not the Venice of grand palaces and marble basilicas you might imagine. Not yet. This is an earlier Venice, a fledgling city built on mudflats and stilts by people seeking refuge from invaders on the mainland. It is a city with few natural resources. No great forests for timber, no fertile fields for grain, no mines for ore. The early Venetians had only one abundant, accessible, and infinitely renewable resource at their disposal: the salty water of the lagoon itself. You are standing on the edge of the Saline, the Venetian salt works. It is a vast, stunning, and almost unnaturally geometric landscape. Here, the salt is not mined but harvested. The process is a scaled-up, engineered version of the solar evaporation you witnessed in prehistory. Seawater from the lagoon is channeled into a complex, sprawling system of interconnected, shallow ponds. Guided by a series of dikes and sluice gates, the water moves slowly from one pond to the next. In each successive pond, the sun and the wind work their slow magic, evaporating the water and making the brine ever more concentrated. The final pond, the Saltern, is where the water is allowed to disappear completely, leaving behind a thick, glittering crust of pure white sea salt. This seemingly simple process was the bedrock of the Venetian Republic's power. Before they were masters of the spice and silk trades, before their galleys dominated the Mediterranean, the Venetians were, first and foremost, masters of salt. They established a near monopoly on the salt trade throughout much of northern Italy and the Adriatic coast. The immense profits from this white gold funded the construction of their first great ships, paid for their first mercenary armies, and financed their early commercial and military expansion. It is a city built on stilts in a swamp, whose first great industry was watching water evaporate. It doesn't sound like a recipe for a global superpower, but the Venetians made it work. They were very, very good at selling salt. You watch the salinieri, the salt workers, at their back-breaking labor under the hot summer sun. They wade through the shallow, briny water, maintaining the clay dikes, dredging the channels, and finally, using long wooden rakes, they harvest the salt, pulling it into huge, gleaming white mounds that look like small snow-capped mountains like the emperors of China. The Doges of Venice understood the power of a monopoly. The salt works were owned and controlled by the state. A powerful government body, the Magistrato al Sal, the salt magistracy, set production quotas, fixed prices, and ruthlessly crushed any competition. In conquered territories, one of Venice's first acts was often to destroy the local salt works, thereby forcing the population to buy their salt from Venice at Venice's price. Historians debate whether Venice's success was due more to its superior salt-making technology or to these aggressive, cutthroat business practices. The truth is likely a potent combination of the two. The rivalry over this precious commodity was deadly serious. The Great Guerra di Chioggia, A massive war fought in the late 14th century between Venice and its archrival, the Republic of Genoa, was fought in large part over control of the lucrative trade routes to the east, including the all-important salt trade to the Black Sea. Imagine trying to explain that to a Roman legionary. We are fighting a great and terrible war to decide who gets to sell salt to the Byzantines. He would be deeply confused, but a Venetian merchant would understand perfectly. The profit margins were magnificent. You watch as the harvested salt is loaded into sacks and carried onto broad, flat-bottomed barges. These barges will carry the salt to the city's great warehouses, the Fondaco del Sale. From there, it will be loaded onto Venetian galleys and transported up the rivers of Italy to feed cities like Padua, Milan, and Florence. Every magnificent palace you will one day see rising from the Grand Canal, every golden mosaic that glitters in the dome of St. Mark's Basilica, is built, in part, on a foundation of these humble white crystals. The Venetians mastered the salt of the warm southern seas. But far to the north, in the cold, gray waters of the Baltic and the North Sea, another great economic power was rising. Theirs was a wealth built not on harvesting salt from the sea, but on harvesting something else from the sea, something whose value could only be unlocked by the transformative, preservative power of salt. The shimmering, sun-drenched lagoon of Venice fades, replaced by a cold, gray, choppy sea under a low, heavy sky. The gentle Mediterranean breeze becomes a sharp, chilling wind that smells not just of salt, but overwhelmingly of fish. You have traveled north to the bustling port cities of the Baltic Sea, places like Lübeck, Hamburg, or Bremen. Here in the late Middle Ages, another great commercial power was built upon the magic of salt, but in a very different way. The architecture here is not of stone and marble, but of dark timber and brick, with steep, gabled roofs designed to shed heavy snows. The ships are not the slender, oared galleys of the Venetian fleet, but sturdy, wide-hulled, single-masted cogs, built to carry heavy cargo through rough northern seas. And the great natural resource here is not salt itself, but the humble herring for several months each year. In an incredible natural spectacle, vast, dense shoals of herring would swarm in the waters of the Baltic, so thick they were said to turn the sea silver. Fishermen could haul them out in unimaginable quantities, but fresh herring, like any fish, would rot within a day or two. It was a useless bounty without the transformative power of salt. This is the secret to the immense wealth of the Hanseatic League, a powerful and influential confederation of merchant guilds and their cities that dominated trade in northern Europe for centuries. They mastered the art of preserving the great herring catches. On the docks of this city, you see a scene of frantic, organized, and profoundly smelly industry. Boats unload mountains of shimmering silver fish. In long wooden sheds, armies of workers, men, women, and children, are gutting, salting, and expertly packing the herring into countless wooden barrels. It's a process that has been refined to a factory-like efficiency. You get the feeling that if you stood still for too long here, someone would try to gut you and pack you in a barrel as well. It's best to keep moving. These barrels of salted herring became one of the most important commodities in all of Europe. They were a cheap, durable, and transportable source of protein that could feed armies, cities, and entire populations through the long, lean winter months. Crucially, salted herring was also permissible to eat on Fridays and during the 40 days of Lent, when the Catholic Church forbade the consumption of meat. The Hanseatic League essentially had a captive market of millions of people who needed something to eat when chicken and beef were off the menu. But where did the salt come from? The cold, rainy climate of the north was completely unsuitable for the solar evaporation methods used by the Venetians. So the Hanseatic merchants became great importers of salt. They sent their sturdy cogs south to the Bay of Bourgneuf in France, or inland to the great salt springs of Lüneburg in Germany, to buy huge quantities of high-quality bay salt or Lüneburg salt. They would then transport it back north to their fishing ports. The salt trade and the herring trade were two inseparable sides of the same hugely profitable coin. The Hanseatic merchants were famously serious, businesslike people. They didn't have the glamour or flair of the Venetians. Theirs was an empire built on practical things: pickled fish, durable barrels, good rope, and sound accounting. It's hard to write a romantic poem about a salted herring, but the profits were undeniably magnificent. For centuries, the center of this trade was the legendary Scania market, a massive temporary trade fair held each autumn on the coast of what is now Sweden. Tens of thousands of people from all over Europe would descend on this spot for a few weeks to buy, sell, and trade herring, turning a quiet stretch of beach into one of the largest and most important commercial centers in the world. Historians debate the reasons for the eventual decline of the Hanseatic League's power in the 15th and 16th centuries. The rise of powerful, centralized kingdoms like England and Denmark, which began to challenge the League's trade monopolies, was certainly a major factor. But another, more mysterious reason may have been ecological. For reasons that are still not fully understood, the great shoals of herring suddenly and inexplicably stopped running in the Baltic and shifted their migration patterns to the North Sea. When the fish left, the very foundation of the Hanseatic trading empire began to crumble. It is a powerful lesson. You can build a mighty economic confederation with its own armies and laws, but if your entire business model is based on a specific type of fish reliably showing up every autumn, you are always just one bad fishing season away from a major recession. We have now seen salt harvested from the sun-drenched pans of the South, and we have seen its power used to preserve the silver bounty of the northern seas. But there is a third, even more dramatic source of this essential mineral, one that required men not to sail upon the water, but to journey deep into the belly of the earth itself, to carve the salt out of solid rock. Our journey now takes us to the great salt mines of Poland. The cold, fish-scented air of the Baltic docks fades away. The world of commerce of ships and barrels dissolves. Our journey takes us inland now, deep into the heart of medieval Central Europe, to the Kingdom of Poland, near the great city of Krakow. You are about to witness the third and final source of salt, not from the sea's surface, but from deep within the belly of the earth. You are following a miner. He leads you to the mouth of a dark, timber-framed shaft, and you begin to descend, not in a modern elevator, but down a seemingly endless flight of wooden stairs, spiraling down, down, down into the cool, silent darkness. The air changes. It becomes cool and still, and it carries a clean, sharp mineral scent. The only light is from the flickering tallow lamp the miner carries. After descending for what feels like an eternity, you step off the staircase and into a vast open space. And you stop speechless. You are not in a cramped, dark mining tunnel. You have entered a subterranean world of breathtaking scale and impossible beauty. This is the Wieliczka salt mine. The cavern you are standing in is immense, larger than any cathedral you have ever seen. The walls are not dirt or stone. They are a shimmering, crystalline gray rock salt. The ceiling high above glitters, as the lamplight catches on a million facets of salt crystal. But the most astonishing thing is not the cavern itself. It is what the miners have done with it. Over the course of centuries, the deeply religious men who toiled in this dangerous underworld carved their faith directly into the rock that surrounded them. The Wieliczka salt mine is famous not just for its salt, but for the dozens of statues and 4 complete, fully functioning chapels carved by the miners directly from the natural rock salt. It was an act of devotion, a way to create a sacred space and pray for protection in their perilous line of work. Your guide leads you into the most spectacular of these, the Chapel of St. Kinga. It is a space so grand and so ornate it defies belief. Everything you see is made of salt. A massive, intricate altarpiece depicting the Last Supper is carved in bas-relief from a single solid wall of salt. A statue of the Madonna and Child, glowing softly in the lamplight, is carved from a purer, whiter salt crystal. Even the magnificent chandeliers that hang from the ceiling, dripping with what looks like glass crystals, are actually made from salt that was dissolved, purified, and then reconstituted to be perfectly transparent. It is, without a doubt, the world's most thoroughly well-seasoned place of worship. This incredible art was born from the immense dangers of the job. Medieval salt mining was a constant struggle against the threats of flooding, cave-ins, and most terrifyingly, fire damp, flammable methane gas that could be released from the rock and ignite with a single spark from a lamp or a tool, causing a catastrophic explosion. The miners, before starting their shift in the darkness, would gather in these chapels to pray for their safety. It was a way of bringing God into the underworld with them. The mine's unique environment has a strange, magical quality. The air is so dry and so saturated with salt that it is almost perfectly sterile and acts as a remarkable preservative. Archaeologists have discovered leather tools, wooden support beams, and even pieces of rope left behind centuries ago, all in a near-perfect state of preservation, saved from the decay that would have destroyed them on the surface. The mine is its own accidental museum. The air is so pure, in fact, that it probably does wonders for the health. You might come out of the mine feeling 10 years younger, or possibly just looking like a human salt lick. It could go either way. Historians and art historians debate the precise origins of these incredible sculptures. Were the miners just exceptionally talented, self-taught folk artists, expressing their faith in their spare time? Or were some of them trained sculptors, perhaps commissioned by the Polish kings who owned the mine, to create these works as a show of royal piety and prestige? The art itself shows a fascinating blend of both, the raw, powerful simplicity of folk art combined with surprisingly sophisticated compositional elements. As you explore deeper, you come to another of the mine's wonders, a silent, subterranean lake. In one of the great excavated caverns, groundwater has seeped in over the centuries and become completely saturated with salt, creating a still, dark, incredibly dense brine that perfectly reflects the glittering cavern ceiling above. Your guide makes a joke that it's impossible to drown in the lake, as the water is so dense you would simply float. You decide not to test this theory. You've seen enough wonders for one day without adding bobbing around in a subterranean salt lake to the list. You have now seen salt as a biological necessity, as a revolutionary technology, as a form of currency, and as the engine of empires. Here, deep in the earth, you have seen it as something more. A medium for profound faith and breathtaking art. This spiritual dimension, this connection between salt and the sacred, is not unique to these Polish miners. It is another deeper thread in our story. You ascend from the cool, silent darkness of the salt mine, blinking as your eyes readjust to the bright sunlight of the upper world. The memory of the salt chapels, those vast, glittering caverns of faith carved from the earth, stays with you. That deep, instinctual connection between salt and the sacred was not just the private belief of a few isolated Polish miners. It is an ancient and powerful idea, a thread of meaning woven through the spiritual traditions of the entire world. But why? Why did this humble mineral, this simple rock, take on such a profound spiritual weight across so many different cultures? The answer lies in its observable, almost magical physical properties. In a world of constant change and decay, salt was a symbol of permanence. In a world of sickness and contamination, salt was a symbol of purity. Think back to its first great technological use, preservation. Salt stops rot. It halts corruption. It takes a perishable piece of meat and makes it last, keeping it wholesome and edible. Early civilizations saw this and they drew a direct metaphorical line. If salt could preserve the body from physical decay, then it could surely represent the power that preserves the soul from spiritual decay. Its brilliant, white, crystalline nature was a perfect symbol of purity. Its sharp, stinging quality when applied to a wound, which we now know as antiseptic, was seen as a cleansing, purifying force. This symbolism is a cornerstone of the great Abrahamic religions. In the Hebrew Bible, God establishes his pacts with the house of David as a covenant of salt. A promise sealed with salt was considered eternal, unbreakable, and incorruptible, just like the mineral itself. Salt was a required component of every temple sacrifice, a physical representation of the purity and permanence of the offering. It's a powerful symbol. Making a promise on a stack of holy books is one thing, Making a promise over a shared bowl of salt meant you were truly, biblically committed to the deal. No takebacksies when incorruptible minerals are involved. This idea carries directly into the Christian New Testament, with one of its most famous passages from the Sermon on the Mount. You are the salt of the earth. The meaning was clear to the audience of the time. Jesus was telling his followers that they were to be a preserving, purifying influence on the world, a force against moral decay and corruption. This legacy continues in the rituals of many Christian denominations, where blessed salt has been historically used in the making of holy water and as a part of the baptismal ceremony, a symbol of cleansing and protection. The tradition extends across the globe. In the Shinto faith of Japan, you can still see this ancient belief in practice today. Small, neat piles of salt, called morihyo, are often placed at the entrance to homes and businesses. This is an act of ritual purification, intended to ward off evil spirits and attract benevolent ones. Sumo wrestlers famously throw handfuls of salt into the ring before a match begins, not for show, but to cleanse the sacred space of any lingering negative energy. But the power of salt was a dual one. Just as it could preserve and purify, it could also scorch and destroy. An army that conquered an enemy city would sometimes sow the enemy's fields with salt. This was a powerful, devastating curse, an act intended to render the land barren and infertile for generations, ensuring the vanquished city could never rise again. It's a very versatile symbol. On the one hand, it's you are the salt of the earth, a force for good. On the other, it's I am going to ritually poison your farmland for all eternity. You really had to pay attention to the context when the salt was brought out. The historical accuracy of the most famous of these stories, the Roman salting of their great rival Carthage, is a subject of intense scholarly debate. While it's a powerful tale of total victory, there is little direct evidence from the time to support it, and the sheer logistical effort of transporting enough salt to ruin an entire region would have been immense. It may be a later invention, a powerful metaphor for absolute destruction rather than a literal agricultural act. From covenants to curses, from purification to preservation, the common thread is clear. Salt's ability to halt the natural process of decay made it a perfect, tangible symbol for the great, unseen struggles between order and chaos, purity and corruption, permanence and decay. Its spiritual significance has faded from our modern, scientific world, but its ghost still lingers. It has left behind faint, fossilized traces in the very words we use every day, echoes of a time when salt was so much more than just a seasoning. The great temples where salt was offered as a sacrifice are now ruins. The divine covenants sealed with salt have passed into the quiet pages of Scripture, but the memory of salt's immense and pervasive power has not vanished completely. It has simply gone into hiding. It has disguised itself, living on as a ghost in the very words we speak every single day. Language, you see, is a museum of history, and its exhibits are the words we use without a second thought. We have already met the most famous example. Every time you receive a salary, you are, in a linguistic sense, a Roman soldier. The word is a direct echo of the salarium, that vital allowance of salt or salt money that was given to the legionaries to preserve their food and keep them healthy. The value of a person's labor, their monthly wage, is still connected by this ancient, invisible thread to a dusty bag of crystals handed out 2,000 years ago, but the echoes are everywhere once you start listening for them. Consider the humble salad. It seems like a modern, healthy invention, but the word itself is Roman. It comes from the Latin root sal for salt. A herba salata was quite literally salted herbs or salted vegetables. The ancient Romans would dress raw greens with a simple, salty brine, or later, an oil and vinegar dressing in which salt was the key ingredient for flavor. So every time you order a Caesar salad, you are participating in a linguistic tradition that stretches right back to Caesar himself. He probably would have been very confused by the Parmesan cheese and croutons, but he would have understood the name perfectly. The trail continues through our culinary vocabulary. The word sauce comes from the same root, as salt was the primary and most powerful flavoring agent for any liquid condiment. And the word sausage is another direct descendant, coming from the Latin salsus, which simply means salted. By its very definition, a sausage is not just a food, but a product of the ancient technology of salt preservation. It seems that almost any word for tasty food eventually leads back to salt. It was the original and for a very long time, the only flavor enhancer available, other than burning it slightly. The memory of salt's social and moral importance is preserved in our idioms. We have already encountered the Roman soldier who had to be worth his salt. The phrase has survived for 2 millennia, still meaning that someone is competent and deserving of their pay. When we call a good, honest, fundamentally decent person the salt of the earth, we are echoing the words from the Sermon on the Mount, speaking of salt as a preserving and purifying force against moral decay. Even the phrase to take something with a grain of salt, meaning to be skeptical of a claim, has its roots in this ancient world. The Roman author Pliny the Elder tells the story of a king who, fearing assassination, made himself immune to all poisons by taking a tiny amount of every known poison each day, along with a single grain of salt, cum grano salis. The phrase evolved over time to mean that a potentially harmful thing, like a dubious story, should be taken with a mitigating element to make it easier to swallow. Linguistic historians sometimes debate the precise evolutionary path of these phrases, but their origin in a world where salt was central is undeniable. In medieval Europe, your social status could be determined by where you sat in relation to the salt. In a great lord's dining hall, a large, often ornate salt cellar would be placed on the main table. Important guests were seated above the salt, close to the lord in this precious commodity. Lesser personages and common folk sat below the salt. Your very place in the social hierarchy was measured by your proximity to the salt shaker. It is humbling to realize how many of our everyday words are connected to this one simple substance. We are all, in a way, speaking a language that has been seasoned by history. Which is a terrible pun, but the point stands. These linguistic fossils are all around us, quiet reminders of a time when salt was not a cheap commodity, but a form of wealth, a tool of statecraft, a symbol of faith, and a measure of a person's worth. But this raises a final question. If salt was so powerful for so long, why is its former glory only visible in these faint, verbal ghosts? Why is it no longer the white gold that paid soldiers and built empires? Because the world changed. A series of technological revolutions would, over the course of a few short centuries, break salt's ancient monopoly on power, and finally, dethrone the once mighty king of all minerals. The air of rural France, heavy with the resentment and injustice of the gabelle, fades away. Our journey takes us eastward now, across the great plains of Europe and into the medieval kingdom of Poland, near the historic city of Krakow. Here, the salt that built royal fortunes came not from the sea, nor from the heavy hand of the taxman, but from deep within the earth itself. You are about to follow a man into this dark, subterranean world. You stand at the entrance to the Great Wieliczka salt mine. The surface is a busy, industrial site, with large wooden winches and hoist mechanisms built over deep shafts. The miner you are with is not a slave, like the men in Gaza, but a free man, a member of a proud and ancient guild. He is dressed in simple, durable clothes, his face etched with the lines of hard labor. He hands you a small, flickering oil lamp, your only defense against the coming darkness, and leads you to a vast, dark opening. You begin the descent, not on a rope, but down a seemingly endless flight of rough-hewn wooden stairs that spiral down and down and down into the earth. The light from the surface vanishes. The air grows cool and still, and it tastes clean and sharply of minerals. The only sound is the rhythmic creak of the wooden stairs and the soft hiss of your lamp. After descending hundreds of feet, you step out into a working cavern. The darkness is immense, a solid, tangible thing, broken only by the small, lonely pools of light cast by the miners' lamps. This was a world of constant, imminent danger. The rhythmic thud, thud, thud of picks against the salt walls could, at any moment, be replaced by the terrifying groan of a collapsing roof. Hitting an unexpected fissure could release a torrent of underground brine, flooding the tunnels and dissolving the very salt pillars that held the ceilings up. But the most terrifying danger of all was one you could not see or hear. It was fire damp, pockets of flammable methane gas. trapped within the salt deposits for millions of years, could be released as the miners worked. A single stray spark, from a pick striking a piece of flint embedded in the salt, or from a poorly trimmed lamp wick, could ignite the gas, causing a catastrophic explosion that would rip through the tunnels in a flash of incinerating heat. The work was so hazardous that the Wyaluxka miners, a deeply religious community, became renowned for their piety. Their work was a constant conversation with mortality. To combat the threat of fire damp, the mine employed specialists for the most dangerous job imaginable. They were known as the penitency, or the penitents. These were the most experienced and bravest miners who would be sent into newly opened chambers first. Dressed in damp clothing to protect them from the flash of heat, they would crawl on their bellies, holding a very long pole with a lit torch at the very end. They would sweep the torch along the ceiling of the cavern, intentionally igniting and burning off the small, accumulated pockets of methane before they could build up to explosive levels. It was a career with a very, very high turnover rate. The job qualifications were simple: be extremely brave and possess absolutely no sense of self-preservation. Historians debate the social status of these miners. Were they considered simple, unskilled laborers? Or were they a highly skilled and respected guild? The sheer complexity of the mine, with its ingenious ventilation systems, its water drainage mechanisms, and the advanced engineering knowledge required to excavate vast caverns without causing a total collapse, suggests a high degree of generational knowledge. These were not just diggers, they were subterranean architects. You see horses down here, their coats dusty and pale, patiently turning the great wooden gears of the hoisting machines. These animals were born, lived, and died in the darkness, never once seeing the sun. On the bright side, their stables were literally carved from a giant salt lick, so they were probably very well seasoned. The work is hard, but the miners have a dark, practical sense of humor. A foreman might tell you the 2 rules of the mine. Rule number 1, don't get lost. Rule number 2, if you hear a strange hissing sound, it's probably gas, so try not to make any sparks. It's not the most reassuring safety briefing you have ever had. After a long shift of cutting and levering great, gray blocks of rock salt, the miner you are following lays down his pick. His work is done for the day. But before he begins the long, arduous climb back to the surface world, he turns and walks down a different tunnel, one that is quieter and wider than the working shafts. His lamp held high, he leads you away from the noise and the danger, towards a different part of this underground kingdom, a place not of labor, but of faith. The narrow, dark working tunnel opens up suddenly, and you step out into a space that makes you stop in your tracks, your breath catching in your throat. The miner you are following holds his lamp high, and the gentle flickering light reveals a scene of breathtaking and impossible beauty. You are standing in a church. Not a church built of wood or stone, but a vast underground cathedral carved in its entirety from the living rock salt of the mine. This is the chapel of St. Kinga, the masterpiece of the miner sculptors of Wyaluxka. The cavern is immense, with a high vaulted ceiling that disappears into the darkness above. And everything is made of salt. Before you stands a massive altarpiece, its surface covered in a detailed bas-relief carving of Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, each disciple's face and robe meticulously rendered in the translucent gray salt. Statues of saints and Polish kings stand in niches along the walls, their features softened by the lamplight. Even the floor beneath your feet is a single polished slab of salt. Hanging from the distant ceiling are magnificent chandeliers. At first, you think their crystals are glass or quartz, but your guide explains that they too are made of salt. The miners would dissolve the purest, most transparent rock salt in water, filter out the impurities, and then allow the supersaturated brine to evaporate slowly over wooden frames. This process would create large, perfectly clear, optically pure salt crystals, which were then painstakingly faceted and assembled into these glittering chandeliers. It is, without a doubt, the most well-seasoned place of worship in the world. The creation of these sacred spaces was an act of profound faith. As you learned, the life of a salt miner was one of constant daily peril. These chapels were their sanctuary. Here, deep in the earth, they could pray for protection from flood, fire, and collapse before beginning their dangerous shifts. The tradition is tied to the legend of Saint Kinga, the patron saint of Poland's salt miners. The story goes that Kinga, a Hungarian princess, was to marry a Polish prince. For her dowry, she asked not for gold or jewels, but for a salt mine for her new salt-poor kingdom. Her father gave her a mine in Hungary, into which she cast her engagement ring. When she arrived in Poland, she instructed workers to dig a well near Krakow. The first thing they pulled from the earth was not water, but a solid lump of rock salt with her very own engagement ring embedded inside, a miracle that revealed the great salt deposits beneath the land. What is most remarkable is that these incredible works of art were not created by famous sculptors commissioned by kings. They were carved by the miners themselves. Men like your guide, after finishing a grueling 10-hour shift of chipping away at a rock face, would spend their few precious free hours here, in the lamplight, patiently carving a statue of a saint or polishing a section of the floor. It was a form of devotion that is almost impossible for the modern mind to comprehend. It is one of the most incredible examples of folk art on the planet. It proves that if you give a group of hardworking people a dangerous job, a deep faith, and a whole lot of salt, they will eventually carve a full-scale replica of the Last Supper. It just seems to be human nature. Art historians debate the stylistic influences on the carvings. While some have the raw, powerful simplicity of self-taught art, others show a clear understanding of the sophisticated Baroque sculptures found in the great cathedrals on the surface in Krakow. This suggests that some of the more talented miner sculptors were not just copying prayer books, but were actively engaging with the great artistic traditions of their time. You walk to the edge of the chapel, the air cool, pure, and still. The acoustics are astonishing. A single footstep echoes through the vast space. The light from the lamps gives the translucent salt walls a warm, gentle, honey-colored glow. It is a place of profound peace, a sacred space hidden from the sun, built as a testament to hope in a world of constant danger. Its faint mineral scent is probably the only church incense in the world that is a core part of the building materials. You have now seen salt as a biological need, a world-changing technology, a form of currency, and the engine of empires. Here, deep in the Polish earth, you have seen it as something else entirely, a medium for faith and art. As you begin the long ascent back to the surface world, you realize that salt's power was not just political or economic. It was also deeply cultural, and it was this cultural and economic power that would fuel one last great chapter in its story: the age of global exploration. The cool, dark, salt-scented air of the Polish mine fades. It is replaced by the fresh, wet, salt spray of the open ocean. The timeline leaps forward again into the great age of discovery of the 15th and 16th centuries. You are standing now on the creaking timber deck of a Portuguese caravel, a small but sturdy vessel designed to cross the world's great, uncharted oceans. The only sounds are the snap of the wind in the vast canvas sails, the groan of the ship's timbers, and the endless hiss of the waves. These ships and the voyages they undertook were the crowning achievement of a new era of science and ambition. But for all their sophisticated design and navigational tools, they were utterly dependent on the same ancient technology that preserved the first hunter's catch: salt. The fundamental problem of long-range ocean travel was always food. A ship could carry live animals and fresh produce for a few weeks, but on a journey that could last for many months, fresh food was an impossibility. The open ocean was the world's largest desert, and to cross it, you needed provisions that would not spoil. You go below deck. The air is thick and close. In the dim light, you see the ship's hold packed to the rafters with heavy wooden barrels. This is the engine room of the Age of Discovery. Barrel after barrel contains the crew's rations. Fresh water, of course, but also thousands of hardtack biscuits, so hard and dry they were practically inedible, and, most importantly, barrel after barrel of salted pork, salted beef, and salted fish. This was the fuel that powered the great voyages of exploration. Without this vast supply of preserved protein, the journeys of Columbus across the Atlantic, of Vasco da Gama around Africa to India, and of Magellan's fleet around the globe would have been completely impossible. The diet on board was not known for its variety or its nutritional benefits. The salted beef, known to the sailors as salt horse, was often so tough from the curing process it had to be soaked for hours just to be chewable. But it was food and it did not rot. In the middle of an uncharted ocean, that was the only 5-star review that mattered. This diet, however, had a terrible hidden cost. The process of heavily salting food destroyed the vital nutrients found in fresh produce, particularly vitamin C. This led directly to the scourge of scurvy, the sailor's disease, which plagued every long voyage of the era. It is a grim irony. The very technology of salt preservation that made the voyages possible also made them incredibly unhealthy. It was like inventing a machine that could fly, but the air inside was poisonous. It was progress, with the terrible asterisk. A huge part of this new global economy was built on a single, humble fish, the cod. The great cod fisheries on the Grand Banks of Newfoundland became a source of immense wealth and international rivalry for the nations of Europe. Cod, being a lean fish, was perfectly suited to being salted and dried until it was as hard and unforgiving as a wooden plank. This salt cod was a nearly indestructible, easily transportable source of protein, and it became a staple food for naval crews, armies, and civilian populations across Europe for centuries. Entire European economies were soon based on this one, rather unattractive, salty dried fish. It's a testament to the fact that if a food product is cheap, lasts forever, and you can eat it on a Friday, it will be a commercial success. Historians debate how much the desperate need for fresh provisions shaped the routes of these early explorations. Was the search for uninhabited islands where the crew could find fresh water, hunt turtles or birds, and gather edible greens as powerful motivator as the search for gold or a new route to the Spice Islands? These small islands became vital, life-saving stepping stones on the new map of the world. This era represents the absolute peak of salt's strategic importance. It is the thread that ties all of our stories together. Salt from the pans of France or the mines of Germany was loaded onto ships to preserve fish caught off the coast of North America, which was then used to feed the sailors who were charting new sea lanes to South America and Asia, which in turn opened up global trade in sugar, spices, silver, and gold. The logistics are mind-boggling. Salt was the humble, essential lubricant for the entire, whirring machine of global expansion. You have now seen salt as a biological imperative, a tool of empire, a medium for faith and art, and the fuel for connecting the world. Its power seems absolute, its importance unshakable. But before we witness the end of its long reign, we must pause to explore its deepest and most intimate meaning, its role not in the grand sweep of history, but in the sacred rituals and covenants that bind people to each other and to their gods. The creaking of the great sailing ship fades into silence, and our journey moves from the vastness of the physical ocean to the depths of the human spirit. We leave the world of trade routes and naval rations to explore why this humble mineral, so crucial for the body, also became essential for the soul. The answer, across countless cultures, lies in its observable, almost mystical properties. In a world defined by change, decay, and corruption, salt was a symbol of the opposite. It was pure white and crystalline. It was eternal. A block of salt does not rot or spoil. Most importantly, as you saw in your first prehistoric lesson, it halts decay in perishable food. Early civilizations witnessed this power, and they made a profound logical leap. If salt could preserve the body from physical corruption, then it must be a powerful symbol for preserving the soul from spiritual corruption. Its sharp, stinging quality in a wound was seen as a cleansing force, and its brilliant whiteness, a sign of purity. This potent symbolism is a cornerstone of the great Abrahamic faith. In the Hebrew Bible, when God establishes an eternal pact with his people, it is called a covenant of salt. A promise sealed with salt was considered unbreakable and everlasting, just like the mineral itself. Salt was also a mandatory component of every temple sacrifice, a physical representation of the purity and permanence of the offering. It's a powerful idea. Making a promise over a shared bowl of salt meant you were truly, fundamentally bound to the deal. The concept travels directly into the Christian New Testament, in one of its most famous passages from the Sermon on the Mount. You are the salt of the earth. Jesus was telling his followers that their role was to be a preserving and purifying influence on a corrupting world. This legacy continues in the rituals of many Christian denominations, where blessed salt has historically been used in the creation of holy water and as part of the baptism ceremony, symbolizing a cleansing from sin and protection from evil. This reverence for salt is a remarkably global phenomenon. In the Shinto faith of Japan, you can still see small, neat cones of salt, called morihyo, placed at the entrances of homes and restaurants. This is an act of ritual purification, meant to ward off evil spirits and attract good fortune. Sumo wrestlers famously throw handfuls of salt into the ring before a match, not for show, but to cleanse the sacred space. But salt's power was dual. Just as it could preserve and sanctify, it could also scorch and destroy. An army that conquered a city would sometimes salt the earth of their vanquished foe, sowing the fields with massive quantities of salt to render the land barren and infertile for generations. It was the ultimate curse, a symbol of total and permanent destruction. It's a very versatile symbol. On one hand, it's "you are the salt of the earth, a force for good." On the other, it's "I am going to ritually poison your farmland for all eternity." Context was everything. The most famous story of this, the Roman salting of Carthage, is itself a subject of intense scholarly debate. While it's a powerful tale that appears in many histories, contemporary accounts of the city's destruction do not mention it. Some historians now believe it may be a later invention, a powerful metaphor for Rome's total victory, rather than a literal agricultural strategy. The sheer amount of salt required to ruin an entire region's farmland would have been logistically staggering, even for the Romans. From covenants to curses, from purification to preservation, the common thread is clear. Salt's ability to halt the natural process of decay made it the perfect, tangible symbol for the great, unseen struggles between order and chaos, purity and corruption, the eternal and the ephemeral. Its spiritual significance has largely faded from our modern, scientific world, but its ghost has not vanished entirely. It has left behind faint, fossilized traces in the very words we use every day, quiet echoes of a time when salt was so much more than just a seasoning. The great temples where salt was offered as a sacrifice are now ruins. The covenants sealed with salt have passed into the quiet pages of Scripture, but the memory of salt's immense power has not vanished completely. It has simply gone undercover, hiding in plain sight in the words we speak every day. Language is a kind of museum, and its display cases are filled with these linguistic fossils, quiet reminders of a time when salt was central to every aspect of life. We have already met the most famous example, the ghost that haunts every payday. The word salary. It is a direct echo of the Latin salarium, the allowance of salt or salt money given to Roman soldiers to keep them healthy and their food preserved. Every time we speak of earning a salary, we are unknowingly channeling the voice of a dusty legionary, acknowledging that our labor is worth the regular payment of this once precious commodity. But the echoes are everywhere once you train your ear to hear them. Consider the humble salad. It seems like a modern dish, but the word itself is ancient Roman, derived from the Latin root sal. A herba salata was quite literally salted greens. The Romans would dress raw vegetables with a simple, salty brine or an oil and vinegar dressing where salt was the essential flavor. So every time you order a Caesar salad, you are participating in a linguistic tradition that goes straight back to ancient Rome. Caesar himself would have been confused by the croutons, but he would have recognized the name. The trail continues through our culinary vocabulary. The word sauce comes from the same root, as salt was the primary and most powerful flavoring for any liquid condiment. The word sausage, too, is a direct descendant coming from the Latin salsus, which simply means salted. By its very definition, a sausage is a food that exists only because of the ancient technology of salt preservation. It appears that almost any word for tasty food eventually leads back to salt. For millennia, it was the only flavor enhancer available. Other than burning it slightly, the memory of salt's social and moral importance is also preserved in our idioms. We know that a good Roman soldier had to be worth his salt. The phrase has survived for 2,000 years, still meaning that someone is competent and deserving of their pay. When we call a good, honest, fundamentally decent person the salt of the earth, we are echoing the Sermon on the Mount, speaking of salt's power as a purifying and preserving force against moral decay. Even the phrase to take something with a grain of salt, meaning to be skeptical of a claim, has its roots in this ancient, salt-centric world. The Roman author Pliny the Elder wrote of a king who, fearing assassination, made himself immune to poisons by taking a tiny amount of every known poison each day, along with a single grain of salt, cum grano salis. The phrase eventually evolved to mean that a potentially harmful thing, like a dubious story, should be taken with a mitigating element to make it easier to swallow. Linguistic historians sometimes debate the precise evolutionary path of these phrases, but their origin in a world where salt was central is undeniable. Your very social status could once be measured by your proximity to salt. In the great dining halls of medieval lords, a large ornate salt cellar was placed on the high table. Important and noble guests were seated above the salt, close to the lord and the precious seasoning. Less important people, retainers, and common folk sat below the salt. Your place in the social hierarchy was literally determined by where you sat in relation to the salt shaker. It is humbling to realize how many of our words and phrases are connected to this one substance. We are all speaking a language that has been seasoned with history, which is a terrible pun, but the point stands. These linguistic fossils are all around us, quiet reminders of a time when salt was a form of wealth, a tool of the state, a symbol of faith, and a measure of a person's worth. But this raises the final, essential question. If salt was so powerful for so long, why is its former glory now visible only in these faint, verbal ghosts? Why is it no longer the white gold that paid soldiers and financed empires? Because the world changed. A series of technological revolutions would, over the course of a few short centuries, break salt's ancient monopoly on power, and finally, dethrone the once mighty king of all minerals. The great king of all minerals did not lose his throne in a violent battle or a grand political revolution. He was simply made redundant. His dethroning came quietly, not from the halls of power, but from the workshops of inventors and the laboratories of scientists. The same spirit of inquiry that unlocked the secrets of the stars and charted the globe eventually turned its attention to the humble, age-old problem of keeping food from spoiling. The first great blow to salt's empire came, fittingly, from a chef. In the early 19th century, a French confectioner named Nicolas Appert perfected the process of canning, sealing food in airtight containers, and then boiling them to kill the microorganisms that cause decay. For the first time, food could be preserved for months or years without using massive quantities of salt. An army, for the first time, could march on a diet that wasn't relentlessly salty. The final decisive blow came a few decades later with the invention and perfection of mechanical refrigeration. The ability to create artificial cold meant that fresh food could be transported and stored for long periods without any preservative at all. The great meatpacking plants of Chicago could now send fresh beef to New York on refrigerated rail cars. The ancient, millennia-long partnership between humanity and salt, a relationship built on the desperate need for preservation, was finally over at the same time. The Industrial Revolution transformed the production of salt itself. Modern geology located vast, previously unreachable underground salt deposits, and powerful new mining equipment could extract it with an efficiency that would have seemed like black magic to a Polish miner. Industrial chemical processes could produce pure, refined salt in immense quantities. Its scarcity, which had been the very source of its value for all of human history, vanished completely. For thousands of years, the most difficult question was, how do we get enough salt? Suddenly, the question became, where do we store all this ridiculously cheap salt? It was a dramatic and permanent demotion, from white gold to that stuff in the shaker next to the pepper. We now live in a world so saturated with salt that its role has been completely inverted. For our ancestors, it was a precious, life-giving treasure to be sought out at great expense. For us, it is most often discussed as a public health problem. a substance to be limited and controlled for fear of its effects on our bodies. This historical reversal is one of the most profound and unexamined changes of the modern era. The only faint echo of its former glory can be found in the luxury food market. We now have pink Himalayan salt, black Hawaiian lava salt, flaky French fleur de sel. This modern obsession with the terroir and mineral notes of artisanal salts is a curious, luxurious ghost of a time when the origin and quality of salt was a matter of life and death. Imagine trying to explain to a Roman legionary that you just paid the modern equivalent of a week's wages for a small bag of pink salt, not because you needed it to survive, but because you enjoyed its delicate finish on a piece of fish. He would look at you as if you were a lunatic. Salt was for survival, not for mouthfeel. Economists and historians debate the role that these new food technologies played in the Great Divergence, the period when Western nations grew so rapidly in wealth and power. Did the ability to safely and cheaply preserve and transport vast quantities of food give European and American powers a significant logistical advantage during the height of their global expansion? It is difficult to argue that it did not. Salt's long reign is finally over. It has traded its crown for a humble glass shaker with a few holes in the top. It now lives a quiet life of retirement on our dinner tables, its epic, violent, and world-shaping history all but forgotten, hidden away inside every tiny, perfect crystal. And so our long journey ends where it began, with a single grain of salt. The memory of the great salt caravans crossing the desert, of the dark mines deep within the earth, of the shimmering Venetian pans and the creaking decks of great sailing ships. All of these stories can now dissolve like salt in water, fading into the quiet of the past. The echoes of the Roman soldier receiving his pay, the Tuareg guide navigating by the stars, the Polish miner carving his faith into the rock, these voices can all grow faint. The history has been told. The great work of salt is done. It has preserved its last meal and paid its last soldier. All that is left now is the peace of the present moment, a stillness as deep and as quiet as a subterranean salt-carved chapel. There is nothing more to see. Your journey is over, and now you can rest.